Hey there! Tonight we're stepping into a quieter side of ancient Greek myth. Not a story of sudden wrath or crashing thunder, but one where consequences unfold slowly, patiently, over time. This is a tale about mortals who once walked too close to the gods, about choices made in confidence, and the long silence that followed. If these slow, thoughtful stories help your mind unwind, you're welcome to like the video, subscribe to the channel, or leave a calm comment, but maybe sharing where you're listening from or what time the night has reached you. Only if it feels gentle. Now, let the noise of the day soften and fade. Settle into the stillness around you, and breathe slowly as we drift into the shadowed hollows of Greek myth, where punishment was rarely loud, never rushed, and always meant to be remembered. In the dim hollows of Tartarus, where the air hung heavy with unspoken regrets, a man stood beneath a laden bough. The fruit swayed gently, ripe and inviting, just beyond the stretch of his fingers. He reached again, as he had for eternities, and the branch lifted away, leaves rustling like faint laughter from above. Not a sound escaped him, not then, not in the endless cycle that bound him. This was the quiet burden of Tantalus, a king who had once feasted with immortals, now condemned to hunger without end. His days among the living had begun in the sunlit halls of Lydia, where gold veins threaded the earth like roots of forgotten wealth. Tantalus ruled with a steady hand. His table always spread with the land's bounty, figs split open to reveal jeweled seeds, wine poured from ewers chased in silver. The gods visited often, drawn by his hospitality, Zeus himself reclining at the head. Conversations flowed like the rivers below his palace, touching on stars and storms, the weave of fate. Tantalus listened, his eyes reflecting the divine glow, but in his heart a curiosity stirred, subtle at first, a whisper questioning the boundaries between mortal and eternal. One evening, as thunder gathered on the horizon, he prepared a feast unlike others. The kitchens hummed with low fires, knives flashing over flesh. His son Pelops was led in silence to the block, a ritual born of twisted ambition, to test the gods' omniscience, to steal a spark of their knowledge. The boy did not cry, his trust in his father held him still. Tantalus worked methodically, portions arranged in the stew, herbs masking the scent. The gods arrived under starlight, robes trailing mist. They ate, or seemed to, until Demeter, lost in grief for her daughter, tasted without seeing. The others paused, forks midway, eyes narrowing. Zeus rose slowly, the air thickening around him. No roar followed. No lightning split the hall. He simply gestured, and the pieces reassembled, Pelops whole again, save for the shoulder Demeter had consumed, replaced now with ivory pale as moonlit bone. Tantalus stood unmoving, the weight of their gazes pressing like unseen chains. "You have reached beyond your measure," Zeus murmured, voice low as distant waves. The gods departed without further word, leaving the palace echoing empty. Tantalus retired to his chambers, the night's silence deeper than before, sensing the first thread of consequence drawing tight. Years unfolded in measured calm. His rule continued, harvest bountiful, alliances forged with quiet diplomacy. Pelops grew strong, his ivory shoulder a silent reminder beneath tunic folds. Tantalus walked the orchards often, fingers brushing low, hanging fruit, but satisfaction eluded him now, a hollow forming within. Whispers reached him from travellers, tales of divine displeasure manifesting slow, like shadows lengthening at dusk. He dismissed them at first, pouring libations at altars, but sleep brought dreams of feasts where food turned to ash on the tongue. The end came not in storm, but in stillness. One dawn, as mist clung to the palace stones, Tantalus woke to find his body light, almost insubstantial. He rose, walked the halls, but servants passed without seeing, their voices muffled as through water. Hunger gnawed sudden and fierce, drawing him to the table where bread waited. His hand passed through it, grasping air. Thirst followed, leading him to the river below, waters clear and inviting. He knelt, cupped hands dipping, but the current receded, leaving only damp sand. Above, branches heavy with pears and apples lifted just as he reached. He understood then, but to the quiet of that morning, the gods' judgment had fallen, not with fury, but with eternal denial. No chains bound him yet. This was the mortal world still, but altered for him alone. He wandered his lands, unseen, untouched, the palace fading behind as hunger drove him onward. Days blurred into one another, feet tracing paths through fields where reapers worked oblivious. He called out once, voice thin and lost in wind, but no head turned. Isolation settled deeper than pain, a companion constant and cold. Exile drew him southward, toward the shadowed realms where earth met underworld. The landscape shifted gradual, hills steepening, air growing chill. Rivers crossed without bridges, waters parting before him, denying even a splash. Fruit groves tempted along the way, branches always rising, always out of grasp. He paused at nightfalls, sitting beneath stars that seemed dimmer, recounting memories of feasts shared, of laughter echoing in halls. Regret came not in waves, but in steady drip, eroding will like water on stone. The gates of Tartarus loomed at last, black iron wrought with scenes of downfall. They swung open without sound, admitting him to depths where light failed. Downward he descended, steps echoing faint in vast emptiness. Rivers of forgetfulness flowed beside, but he could not drink. At the nadir, a pool waited, clear and still, surrounded by trees bowed with eternal yield. He stood there, reaching again, the cycle resuming unbroken. Echoes of divine voices lingered in the stone, reminders of the feast that had sealed this. Companions joined in time, others drawn by similar threads of hubris. Sisyphus arrived first, boulder in tow, muscles straining under endless labour. They did not speak, their punishments allowed no communion. Tantalus watched the rock roll back, time after time, the king's face etched with quiet endurance. Action followed, bound to his wheel, spinning slow in fiery arc. Flames licked without consuming, pain a constant hum. Tantalus felt their presence as shadows, each bound in solitude amid the shared gloom. The rhythm of eternity set in reach, recede, hunger unslaked. Memories of Lydia faded to whispers, Pelops' face a blur. The gods visited rarely. Gazes passing over without pause, affirming the order restored. Tantalus ceased struggling against the branch, movements mechanical now, a ritual affirming consequence. And in that perpetual almost touch, the first true weight of divine order pressed, silent, unyielding, drawing the next soul nearer to the hollows. The hollows of Tartarus deepened as new footsteps echoed along the black stone. Ixion arrived next, dragged by unseen hands. His chariot wheels, still smouldering from the lightning that had ended his mortal flight. He had been king of the Lapiths, tall and broad-shouldered, his beard streaked with the first silver of middle years. Once, he had ridden across Thessaly's plains, horses foaming beneath him, the wind tearing at his cloak. Feasts had followed every victory, wine flowing until dawn, laughter rising like smoke. The gods had watched from Olympus, amused at first by his vigour. One night, after too many cups, desire had taken root. Nephil, the cloud woman Zeus had shaped to test mortal fidelity, had been placed in his hall. Ixion saw only beauty, not the divine snare. He approached her in the shadowed chamber, hands gentle at first, then insistent. She yielded, or seemed to, until the moment of union. Then the cloud dissolved, leaving him alone with the echo of his own breath. Shame burned brief, then hardened into defiance. He denied the act, swore by the hearth that no woman had shared his bed that night. Zeus summoned him to Olympus under pretense of friendship. The golden halls gleamed, nectar poured into cups that never emptied. Ixion reclined, still bold, still certain his lie held. When the thunder god rose, voice soft as distant rain, the truth unravelled. You have taken what was not yours, and lied before the hearth. No anger cracked the air, only a slow turning of the wrist. Lightning coiled around Ixion's limbs, binding him to a wheel of fire. The wheel spun once, twice, then lifted, carrying him upward through the clouds, then downward into the pit. He arrived in Tartarus, still turning, flames licking without consuming, the motion ceaseless. Tantalus watched from his pool's edge as the wheel rolled past, Ixion's face appearing and disappearing in rhythmic arcs. No greeting passed between them, but the firelight flickered across Tantalus' features, illuminating the hollows beneath his eyes. He reached again for the fruit, fingers closing on air. The branch lifted, as always. Hunger gnawed deeper, a familiar ache now, almost companionable in its persistence. Ixion's wheel groaned on its axis, the sound blending with the distant drip of unseen water. Days, or what passed for days, accumulated in silence. Tantalus paced the circumference of his pool, bare feet leaving no print on the ash. The trees stood unchanging, leaves never falling, fruit never ripening beyond perfection. He sat sometimes, back against a trunk, listening to the wheel's steady creak. Ixion never cried out. Pain had become the ground beneath him, constant and unremarkable. Their eyes met occasionally when the wheel brought him level, brief. Wordless acknowledgement of shared exile. Then came Sisyphus. He entered Tartarus under his own power, boulder already in his grasp, muscles corded from the first ascent. King of Corinth, cunning beyond measure, he had outwitted death itself twice. When Thanatos came to bind him, Sisyphus had fastened the chains around the god instead, leaving the world without endings for a season. Later, when Hermes retrieved death, Sisyphus whispered to his wife, "Do not bury me." Her obedience left his shade restless, demanding passage back across the river. He bargained with Hades, promising riches that never arrived, buying time with lies. Hades tired of the game at last. The boulder appeared, rough granite, heavy as regret. Sisyphus bent, shoulders taking the weight, and began the climb. The slope rose gradual, then steepened, stones shifting beneath his feet. He reached the crest once, breath ragged, then watched the boulder roll down again, gathering speed, dust trailing like smoke. He descended without pause, found it waiting at the base, lifted once more. The cycle locked into place. Tantalus observed the labour from afar. Sisyphus moved with quiet determination, each step measured, each have precise. No curses fell from his lips, only the steady rhythm of breath and effort. When he passed near the pool, their gazes met, Sisyphus' eyes dark with focus, Tantalus dulled by endless want. Neither paused. The boulder rumbled onward, the wheel spun, the branch lifted. 3 punishments, 3 silences, bound by the same unyielding order. Time lost its edges in that place. Tantalus no longer counted reaches. The motion had become breath, automatic and empty. Hunger no longer surprised him. It simply was a tide that rose and fell without cresting. He watched Exion's wheel trace its fiery arc. Sisyphus pushed the stone upward, both men locked in their private eternities. The air remained cool, unchanging, scented faintly with sulphur and stone. No visitors came from above. The gods did not need to witness what they had already set in motion. Yet something shifted, subtle as a change in light. New footsteps sounded along the far corridor, slow and dragging. A woman appeared at the edge of the gloom, Niobe, once queen of Thebes, her robes tattered, face gaunt with a grief that had outlasted flesh. She carried no burden, no wheel, no fruit. Her punishment was different, the memory of 14 children lost, each name still sharp on her tongue. She walked among the 3, eyes passing over them, without recognition, then sank to her knees beside the pool and began to weep. No tears fell, the ducts had long since dried. Only the motion remained, shoulders rising and falling in silent rhythm. Tantalus watched her for what might have been years. Her grief became another constant in the hollow, blending with the wheel's creak, the boulder's rumble, the branches rustle. She never spoke, never reached for the fruit. She simply mourned, endlessly, the children taken because she had once boasted her womb surpassed Leto's. And in the quiet accumulation of their separate torments, the first faint tremor of something larger stirred. Divine order not merely punishing, but preserving each soul's ruin a brick in the wall that kept the cosmos steady. Niobe remained kneeling beside the pool, long after the first century of her arrival had passed unmarked. Her shoulders continued their slow rise and fall, the motion mechanical now, stripped of sound or tears. The children she had once carried in her arms, 7 daughters graceful as young willows, 7 sons strong as young oaks, lived only in the silent shaping of her lips. She formed their names without breath, each syllable a ritual repeated into the unchanging dark. The names never reached the air, but died on her tongue and were reborn on the next exhale. Tantalus watched her from the opposite shore of the pool. He had ceased reaching for the fruit during her silent litany, as though the presence of her grief demanded a pause in his own. The branch hung lower in those moments, but fruit brushing almost within grasp. then withdrew again when she began the next name. He did not resent the interruption. Resentment required energy he no longer possessed. Instead he sat, knees drawn to chest, listening to the rhythm of her mourning become another layer in the hollow's quiet symphony. The wheels creak, the boulders rumble, the soft rustle of leaves that never fell. One cycle, perhaps 1,000 years, perhaps a single breath. Niobe rose without warning. She walked past Tantalus, past Ixion's spinning fire, past Sisyphus labouring upward, and continued deeper into the corridors of Tartarus. Her footsteps left no echo. Tantalus followed at a distance, drawn not by curiosity, but by the faint pull of shared silence. The passage narrowed, walls pressing closer until stone brushed his shoulders. Light failed entirely, yet he saw, eyes adjusted to eternal dimness. Or perhaps the darkness itself had grown thin enough to see through. Niobe stopped before a vast stone face carved into the rock. The features were feminine, regal, eyes closed as though in meditation. Water seeped from cracks above the brow, tracing slow paths down the cheeks, but pooling in the hollow of the collarbone before dripping to the floor. Niobe knelt again, forehead touching the cold stone feet. She remained there, unmoving, until the seepage gathered into a thin stream that flowed over her back, matting her hair, darkening her robes. The water never ceased, never flooded, simply continued its patient course, washing without cleansing, grieving without end. Tantalus understood then this was her final station. The stone was Leto, mother of Apollo and Artemis. Forever weeping the tears Niobe had once mocked, the queen who had boasted her 14 children, surpassed the goddesses too, now shared the goddesses' sorrow. Drop by drop, century by century. No words passed between them. The stone face remained serene, eyes shut against the world. Niobe's shoulders rose and fell against the stone, matching the rhythm of the falling water. He turned away at last, retracing his path through the narrowing corridor. When he emerged again beside his pool, the branch waited, but fruit gleaming as though freshly ripened. He reached, it lifted. Hunger returned, familiar and unremarkable. Ixion's wheel continued its arc. Sisyphus descended once more to lift the boulder. The hollow felt larger in Niobe's absence, emptier yet heavier, as though her grief had left a space that silence could not fill. New arrivals came in time, drawn by the same slow gravity. First a hunter, Actaeon, his body still marked by the faint pattern of torn flesh where hounds had found him. He had glimpsed Artemis bathing in a mountain pool, seen the goddess unveiled. She had not cried out. She had only turned her gaze upon him, calm and absolute. Water had risen around him, reshaping limbs into paws, spine lengthening, ears sharpening. His own hounds, loyal until that moment, scented the change and pursued. He had run through underbrush, heart pounding, until teeth closed on throat and flank. The transformation ended in blood. The punishment began in memory. In Tartarus he wandered, forever hearing the baying behind him, forever feeling fangs at his heels, yet never quite caught. He did not speak to the others. He paced the perimeter of the hollow, head turning at sounds only he could hear, muscles twitching beneath skin that bore no visible scars. When he passed near the pool, Tantalus stepped aside without looking up. Actaeon paused once, nostrils flaring, then moved on, driven by the phantom pack. Next came Arachne, small and deft, fingered, her hands still stained with the dyes of her loom. She had woven tapestries that rivaled Athena's own, scenes of divine misdeeds, rendered in thread, so fine the figures seemed to breathe. The goddess had come disguised as an old woman, offering counsel. Arachne had refused, pride bright in her eyes. When the contest began, she worked without pause, shuttle flying, colours blooming into stories of Zeus's transformations, Poseidon's pursuits, Apollo's failures. Athena's work was flawless, orderly, a hymn to divine majesty. Arachne's was truer, sharper, unflinching. The goddess had stood over the finished cloth, silent. Then, with a single gesture, she tore it, threads snapping like small bones. Arachne's fingers had flown to her throat as though to strangle the gasp that rose. Athena touched her brow, and the change began, body shrinking, limbs multiplying, silk glands forming within. She spun her final web in the corner of the workroom, hanging there, small and black, forever weaving without pattern or purpose. In Tartarus she moved along the walls, spinning thread that led nowhere, webs dissolving as soon as they formed. She worked in silence, 8 legs moving in precise rhythm, never stopping, never completing. When she crossed Tantalus a path, he felt the faint brush of silk against his ankle, cold, fleeting, gone before he could look down. The hollow grew fuller, yet no less empty. Each new soul added weight to the silence, deepened the stillness. Tantalus sat again by the pool, hunger a steady pulse beneath his ribs. The branch hung, waited, withdrew. Above, in the world of sun and season, altars smoked with offerings, voices rose in prayer. Down here, the punished continued their quiet labours, preserving the order they had once disturbed, and as the new arrivals settled into their separate eternities, the first faint tremor of escalation stirred, not in sound, but in the slow tightening of divine memory, drawing yet another thread toward the shadowed hollows. The corridors of Tartarus stretched farther than memory could hold, and new footsteps sounded along them with increasing frequency. Each arrival brought a slight alteration to the air, a faint shift in temperature, a new scent of earth or smoke or salt. The hollow no longer felt vast. It had become crowded with separate silences, each punishment carving its own small territory within the greater dark. Cassandra came next, led by no visible hand, yet moving as though guided. Once priestess of Apollo in Troy, she had walked temple corridors lined with laurel, incense curling around her ankles. The god had appeared to her in the inner sanctum, light spilling from his shoulders like molten gold. He offered knowledge in exchange for her body. She accepted the gift, then refused the price. Apollo's smile had not faltered. He touched her lips, and the gift remained, foresight sharp as a blade, but no one would ever believe her again. She entered Tartarus with head bowed, long hair falling across her face like a veil. She did not weep or cry out. Instead she walked to the nearest wall and pressed her palms flat against the stone. Words formed on her lips, prophecies, warnings, visions of cities burning, children dashed against rocks, heroes falling in dust. The words spilled forth in a steady stream, clear and urgent. Yet the sound never rose above, a whisper. The stone absorbed them, leaving no echo, no trace. She spoke without pause, hour after hour, century after century. The prophecies flowing into the rock as water into parched earth. Tantalus watched her from across the pool. Her voice reached him as the faintest murmur, fragments of doom. He could almost understand. He listened, hunger momentarily forgotten, branch hanging untouched. When she turned her face toward him, eyes wide and unseeing, the words continued unbroken. She saw the future of every soul in the hollow. Sisyphus pushing the same stone forever. Ixion spinning, Niobe weeping beside the stone Leto, and still she spoke, knowing no one would heed her, knowing the words would vanish into stone. Actaeon passed her often on his restless circuits, ears twitching at the low sound, but never stopping. Arachne continued her futile spinning, silk threads dissolving before they could form pattern. The hollow filled with layered silence, the creak of the wheel, the rumble of the boulder, the rustle of leaves, the soft drip of Leto's tears, the whisper of Cassandra's unending prophecy. Then came Tityos. He arrived in agony, body already stretched across the floor, vast and swollen. Once he had tried to force himself upon Leto as she travelled to Delphi. The twins, Apollo and Artemis, had answered her cry with arrows that pinned him to the earth. In Tartarus the punishment resumed without interruption. 2 vultures, black, winged and patient, perched upon his ribs. Each day they tore into his liver, beaks sharp, talons steady. Each night the flesh regrew, pale and tender, ready for the next dawn's feeding. Tityos lay on his back, arms spread, eyes fixed on the ceiling where no light reached. He did not scream, the pain had long since burned away sound. Only the wet tearing of beaks and the soft rustle of feathers mark the hours. Blood pooled beneath him, then vanished into the stone, leaving no stain. The vultures worked in silence, methodical, never hurried. When they lifted away at dusk, wings folding, he breathed once, shallow, then waited for the flesh to knit. Tantalus walked past him slowly, careful not to disturb the rhythm. The sight of the great body opened and renewed, but deepened the hollow's weight. Hunger felt small beside such sustained violation. He returned to his pool, reached for the fruit. The branch lifted. He sat again, knees drawn up, watching the vultures settle for the night. The arrivals slowed, then ceased for a long span. The hollow settled into its own deep rhythm, each punishment turning like a gear within a vast, unseen mechanism. Tantalus no longer paced. He remained seated by the water, arms resting on bent knees, gaze fixed on the opposite shore. The fruit swayed above him, close enough to smell, sweet, overripe, maddening, but he no longer lifted his hand. The motion had become unnecessary. Denial itself had become the punishment. Cassandra continued her whispering litany against the wall. Actaeon circled without rest. Arachne spun threads that led nowhere. Niobe knelt beside the stone mother, shoulders rising and falling. Ixion spun. Sisyphus climbed. Tityos endured. The air remained cool, unchanging, heavy with the scent of stone and faint iron, yet the stillness was not complete. Somewhere deeper, beyond the corridors Tantalus had walked, a new sound began, faint, irregular, like a distant heartbeat. It grew slowly, never loud, yet impossible to ignore. The others felt it too. Cassandra's words faltered for the first time in centuries. Actaeon paused mid-step. Arakan's legs stilled. Even the vultures lifted their heads, beaks dripping. Tantalus rose. He walked toward the sound, past the pool, past the stone face of Leto, past the wall where Cassandra stood frozen. The corridor narrowed again, then opened into a chamber he had never seen. At its centre stood a single figure, small and bent, Prometheus, chained to the rock, liver already torn open by the eagle that perched above him. The bird had not yet begun its daily work. It waited, wings half spread watching. Prometheus lifted his head. His eyes met Tantalus across the distance. No words passed. Only recognition, two who had once reached too far. Two who had once believed they could steal fire or knowledge or favour from the divine. The eagle stirred, talons flexing. Prometheus returned his gaze to the ceiling, calm, waiting. Tantalus stood at the threshold, unmoving. The heartbeat sound resolved into the slow drip of water from the eagle's beak, or perhaps from the wound itself. The chamber felt colder, the air thinner. And as the eagle finally descended, wings folding, the quiet certainty settled deeper. The punishments were not isolated, but linked, each one a single note in an unending hymn to order. And the next note was already being written. The eagle descended once more upon Prometheus, wings folding with deliberate grace. Talons settled on the rock, beak opened, and the first tear began. Prometheus did not flinch. His chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, eyes fixed on some point beyond the ceiling, as though watching clouds that no longer existed. Blood welled dark, then brighter as the bird worked, patient and methodical. Tantalus stood at the threshold until the sound of tearing flesh became steady, almost meditative. Then he turned away, footsteps soft on stone, returning to the hollow where the others waited in their separate cycles. The air felt thicker upon his return, as though the new punishment had added another layer to the silence. Cassandra's whispering had resumed, lips moving against the wall in unbroken flow. Actaeon circled faster now, a head turning at shadows only he could see. Arachne's legs moved in precise, futile arcs, silk dissolving before it could hold. Tantalus resumed his place by the pool. He did not reach for the fruit. The branch hung low, tempting, then lifted of its own accord. Hunger remained, a dull pulse beneath the ribs, but the act of reaching had become optional, a small, private rebellion that changed nothing. Centuries accumulated without mark. The hollow's rhythm deepened, each punishment settling into the others, like roots intertwining beneath soil. Prometheus remained apart, yet his presence seeped through the corridors, a quiet gravity, pulling the others' attention inward. Tantalus walked to the edge of the chamber once more, standing farther back this time, watching without approaching. The eagle finished its meal, lifted away, wings spreading wide, before vanishing into the upper dark. Prometheus exhaled once, long and slow, liver already beginning to knit pale and new beneath the torn skin. He spoke then, voice low, cracked from Dessous yet clear. You came to see the fire, stealer. No question, only statement. Tantalus did not answer. Prometheus turned his head slightly, chains clinking against rock. They gave me foresight too, once. Enough to know the pain would return each dawn. Enough to know it would never end. He paused, breath shallow. You took knowledge by force. I gave it freely. The difference is small when the result is the same. Tantalus felt the words settle, heavy and unremarkable. He had no reply. Prometheus continued, tone unchanging. They fear the spark more than the flame. One man reaches, another shares, or both threaten the order. The eagle's shadow passed overhead again, circling once before settling. Prometheus closed his eyes. Go back. The hollow waits. Tantalus withdrew. The corridor seemed longer on the return, walls pressing closer. When he emerged, the others had not moved. Yet something had shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. Cassandra's prophecies now carried a new note, not louder, but clearer fragments of chains breaking, of eagles falling, of stones left still at the base of slopes. She spoke them to the stone, and the stone absorbed them. But the words lingered longer in the air before vanishing. The hollow grew restless in its stillness. Actaeon paused mid-circle, ears pricked toward the corridor. Arachne's threads held for a fraction longer before dissolving, a single filament remaining suspended for the space of a breath. Niobe's shoulders rose higher, fell slower, as though listening. Ixion's wheel slowed its spin for the briefest instant, fire dimming, then resumed. Sisyphus reached the crest, pushed, watched the boulder roll down, and for the first time, he did not immediately descend. He stood at the top, breathing, gazing downward, then began the walk again. Tantalus sat once more. The fruit swayed above him, closer than ever, skin gleaming with dew that never fell. He lifted his hand slowly, fingers stretching. The branch bent toward him, almost obliging. His fingertips brushed the smooth surface, cool, real, yielding for the space of a heartbeat. Then the branch snapped upward, fruit vanishing into shadow. Hunger surged, sharper, then settled again into its familiar ache. The change was not freedom. It was a reminder the gods allowed no victory, not even the illusion of one. The brief touch only deepened the denial. Tantalus lowered his hand. He watched the others, each locked in motion, yet touched by the same faint tremor. Prometheus had spoken, and the words had travelled, carried on the slow current of shared silence. Deeper still, a new sound began, fainter than the eagle's wings, softer than dripping water. A low hum, like distant bees or the vibration of taut string. It rose from the floor, passed through stone, entered bone. Tantalus felt it in his teeth, in the hollow of his chest. The others felt it too. Cassandra's lips stilled. Actaeon crouched low. Arachne froze mid-spin. Even the vultures on Tityos lifted their heads, beaks dripping, wings half spread. The hum grew, never loud, yet inescapable. It carried no words, no prophecy, only the sense of something turning, slowly, inevitably, toward completion. Tantalus rose. He walked past the pool, past the weeping stone, past the wall of absorbed warnings, and stood once more at the threshold of Prometheus' chamber. The Titan lay as before, chains tight, eagle-perched and waiting, but his eyes were open now, calm, almost serene. The hum reached its source here, vibrating through the rock itself. Prometheus looked at Tantalus across the distance. "The wheel turns," he said quietly. "Not ours. Theirs." The eagle descended, beak opened, Prometheus did not look away. And as the first tier began again, the hum deepened, spreading outward through corridors and hollows, through punishments old and new, carrying the quiet promise that even divine order, once set in motion, must someday reach its own unyielding end. The hum that had begun in Prometheus' chamber spread outward like slow, moving water through cracked stone. It travelled along the corridors, entered the hollow, brushed against every bound soul without disturbing their motion. Tantalus felt it settle beneath his skin, a vibration too deep for sound, too quiet for alarm. But the fruit above him swayed in time with it, branch bending lower than ever before, then rising again in perfect obedience to the unseen rhythm. Cassandra was the first to falter visibly. Her lips continued forming prophecies, but the words came slower, each one lingering in the air a fraction longer before the stone drank them. She pressed her forehead harder against the wall, as though trying to force the visions deeper to make them stick. Once, her hand lifted, fingers trembling, and touched the rock. For the space of a breath, the stone seemed to warm beneath her palm. Then it cooled again, and her hand fell back to her side. She resumed speaking, but the prophecies now carried a new thread, not only endings, but moments when endings might pause. Actaeon stopped circling. He crouched low near the pool, ears flat, nostrils wide. The phantom baying that had driven him for centuries grew fainter, as though the hounds had scented something else and turned aside. He lifted his head, eyes reflecting the dim glow of Exion's wheel, and for the first time since his arrival he remained still. No twitch of muscle, no darting glance, only listening. The hum entered his bones, quieting the chase that lived inside them. Arachne's legs slowed. One thread held, thin, silver, trembling, long enough for her to complete a single knot. The web did not dissolve immediately. It hung there, fragile and perfect, catching a gleam from nowhere. She paused, all 8 eyes fixed on the small structure, then began again. The next thread joined the first. Another followed. The web grew slowly, deliberately, no larger than a man's palm, yet it endured. Niobe lifted her head from Leto's stone feet. The water still dripped over her back, tracing old paths down her spine. But she no longer moved in rhythm with it. She sat upright, shoulders squared, hands resting open in her lap. The names of her children no longer formed on her lips. Instead she gazed at the falling drops, watching each one gather, fall, vanish into the stone. The motion of grief continued inside her, but the outward ritual had paused, as though waiting for permission to resume. Ixion's wheel turned more slowly. Fire dimmed along the rim, flames curling inward like petals closing at dusk. He did not speak, no one expected him to. Yet the spin lost urgency, each revolution stretching longer than the last. The chains that bound him to the loosened by the width of a single link. Not enough to free him, only enough to remind him that looseness existed. Sisyphus reached the crest again. He pushed. The boulder crested, hesitated at the top, balanced for the first time on the very edge, and did not immediately roll. It remained there, still, while Sisyphus stood behind it, hands pressed to rough granite, breath steady. He looked down the slope he had climbed so many thousand times. The path lay clear, unmarked by footprints, waiting. After a long moment, he stepped forward, placed both palms against the stone, and pushed once more. The boulder began its descent, slow, almost gentle. Sisyphus watched it go, then turned and began the walk down, unhurried. Tityos lay as always, vast and opened, but the vultures hesitated before descending. They circled once, twice, wings beating in the thin air, then settled on the rock above him, rather than upon his ribs. Their beaks remained closed. They watched, patient, as the torn flesh beneath them began to knit without interruption. The Titan's breathing deepened, each inhale drawing the hum further into his lungs. Tantalus rose from his place by the pool. He walked to the nearest tree, stood beneath the lowest branch. The fruit hung within reach, closer than it had ever been, skin flushed with ripeness, dew gathering at the stem. He lifted his hand slowly. Fingers closed around the smooth curve. The fruit remained. No sudden lift, no receding branch. He held it, felt its weight, felt the coolness against his palm. For the first time in eternity, he brought it to his lips. He did not bite. He only pressed it there, tasting the faint sweetness through unbroken skin. Then he lowered his hand, set the fruit back on the branch. It stayed where he placed it. The tree did not withdraw. The branch remained low, leaves still. He turned toward the corridor that led to Prometheus. The others followed, Cassandra stepping away from the wall, Actaeon rising to his feet, Arachne leaving her small web intact, Niobe standing, Exion's wheel slowing to a halt, Sisyphus pausing at the base of the slope, Tityos watching the vultures perch motionless. They moved together, not in haste, not in hope, but in quiet recognition that the rhythm had shifted. The chamber opened before them. Prometheus lay chained, eagle perched above, yet neither bird nor Titan moved. The hum had grown into a steady resonance, but filling the space without overwhelming it. Prometheus lifted his head. "You felt it," he said, voice calm. Tantalus nodded once. "The order is not broken." Prometheus continued. "It is complete. Every punishment fulfilled its measure. Every debt paid in full, down to the last breath of endurance." The eagle lifted its wings, not to descend, but to rise. It circled once, then flew upward, vanishing into the dark above. Chains loosened on Prometheus' wrists, links falling away like dead leaves. He sat up slowly, rubbing the raw skin, then stood. The rock behind him remained, but the Titan no longer belonged to it. The others watched in silence. No joy rose in their faces, no relief, only a deep, quiet stillness. Prometheus looked at each of them in turn. Cassandra, Actaeon, Arachne, Niobe, Ixion, Sisyphus, Tityos, Tantalus. Then he spoke again softly. "The gods have no need to punish forever. The lesson is learned, the balance restored. What remains is choice." He stepped forward. The corridor behind him brightened, not with sudden light, but with a gradual thinning of shadow, and as the hum faded into silence, the first true possibility opened. Not freedom shouted, but freedom offered. Quiet and absolute, waiting for each soul to decide whether to step through. The chamber held its breath as Prometheus stood fully upright. The chains lay coiled at his feet like shed skin, iron links dull and cold against the stone. He flexed his wrists once, slowly, feeling blood move again through veins long compressed. The eagle had vanished into the upper dark. No shadow of wings remained. The hum that had filled the space now faded to the faintest echo, then to nothing at all. Silence returned, not the heavy silence of punishment, but the open silence of possibility. Prometheus looked at the gathered souls one by one. Tantalus stood nearest, arms at his sides. The fruit he had once touched still resting on the low branch behind him. Cassandra beside him, lips parted but no longer moving. Actaeon crouched low, ears no longer flattened in fear. Arachne perched motionless, her small web intact and gleaming faintly. Niobe upright, hands open. Ixion free of his wheel, standing on legs that had forgotten stillness. Sisyphus at the chamber's edge, boulder left behind at the base of the slope. Tityos seated now, vast body closed, vultures gone. No one spoke. Words had become unnecessary. The air carried only the slow rhythm of breathing, mortal breathing, even here in the depths. Prometheus stepped forward. The corridor that had once narrowed now widened, walls receding as though the stone itself withdrew. Light appeared, not sudden, not blinding, but a gradual greying of the dark, like dawn seeping under a door. The path led upward, gentle slope, no steps, no chains. He walked without hurry. The others followed, not in a line, but scattered, each choosing their own pace, their own distance. Tantalus moved last. He paused at the threshold, looked back once. The pool lay still, surface unbroken. The trees stood as they had for eternity, fruit hanging low now, untouched. He could have reached again, taken one, bitten, tasted. Instead he turned away. The hollow had held him long enough. The ascent began. Stone gave way to earth, then to roots, then to open air. The ceiling lifted until sky appeared, pale, clouded, the first clouds any of them had seen in countless ages. Wind moved across their faces, carrying the scent of pine, rain, distant salt. No one rushed. They walked as people walk who have forgotten speed, each step deliberate, feeling the ground beneath bare feet or hooves or claws. Cassandra emerged first into daylight. She lifted her face to the sky. A single tear traced her cheek. Not grief, not joy, only the body remembering how to weep. She spoke no prophecy. The words had left her. She simply stood breathing. Actaeon followed. He shook himself once, as though shedding water, then lifted his head. The baying had gone silent. He took a step forward, then another, testing legs that were his own again. The forest waited beyond the opening, trees tall and green, paths wending between them. He walked toward it slowly, disappearing among the trunks. Arachne came next. She descended from the rock, where she had perched, legs folding beneath her, until she stood human once more, small, dark-haired, fingers flexing. She looked at her hands, turned them over, then walked toward a nearby tree. A single spider thread drifted from her fingertip, caught the breeze, floated upward. She smiled, small, private, then continued on. Niobe stepped into the light. She raised her arms slowly, palms open to the sky. No children appeared. No voices called her name. Yet the weight on her shoulders had lifted, not vanished, only lightened enough to carry. She walked forward, toward the distant sound of running water, footsteps steady. Ixion emerged, stretching his arms wide. The fire that had once bound him had left no scars. He looked at the sky, then at the plain below. A single chariot waited there, simple, wooden, horses grazing quietly. He walked down the slope, took the reins, mounted. The horses lifted their heads. He drove away at a walk, not racing, only moving. Sisyphus came last of the strong ones. He paused at the opening, looked back toward the slope he had climbed so many times. The boulder remained at the bottom, still no longer rolling. He nodded once, to the stone, to the path, to himself, then stepped into the open air. He walked downhill, empty-handed, shoulders unbowed. Tityos rose slowly, body shrinking as he moved, until he stood no taller than the others. He looked at his hands, clean, whole, then at the sky. He took a deep breath, chest expanding without pain, then began walking toward the horizon, each step longer than the last. Tantalus was the final to cross the threshold. He emerged into full daylight. The sun stood high, warm on his skin. He lifted his face to it, closed his eyes. For the first time in eternity, no hunger stirred beneath his ribs. No branch lifted away. He opened his eyes again, looked at the world spread before him, fields, rivers, distant mountains, the slow turn of seasons waiting below. Prometheus stood a little apart, watching them all. He spoke once more, voice soft as wind through leaves. The gods have finished their work. The order is whole. What you do now is yours. He turned then, walked toward a narrow path that led upwards still, toward Olympus, perhaps, or somewhere else entirely. No one followed him. They had no need. The plain stretched wide and open. Each soul chose a direction, not in haste, not in fear, but in quiet certainty. Paths diverged slowly, footprints faint on grass that had never known weight before. Tantalus walked toward the river. He could see glinting in the distance. He knelt at the bank, cupped water in his hands, drank deeply. The current flowed cool and steady, giving without receding. He drank again, then stood, water dripping from his fingers. Behind him the opening to Tartarus had closed, not sealed, but simply no longer there. Only grass grew where the threshold had been. And in that wide, sunlit silence, the weight of divine judgment lifted at last. Not with thunder, but with the soft sound of wind moving freely across open land. The plain stretched wide beneath a sky that had no memory of punishment. Sunlight moved across the grass in slow, golden waves, warming stone that had once been cold forever. Tantalus walked alone now, the others having chosen their separate paths hours before. His steps left faint impressions in the soft earth, marks that would fade by evening, yet they felt real, deliberate, owned. He reached the river at midday. It flowed broad and unhurried, surface dappled with light. Banks lined with reeds that bent gently in the breeze. No current receded when he knelt. No water slipped through his fingers. He cupped both hands, brought them to his lips, drank. The taste was clean, ordinary, endlessly renewing. He drank again, longer this time, letting the coolness travel down his throat, fill the hollow place that had ached without pause for ages beyond counting. When he lowered his hands, droplets fell back into the stream, small circles widening, then smoothing away. He sat on the bank, legs stretched toward the water. The sun warmed his face, his arms, the tops of his feet. No hunger stirred. No branch lifted away in mockery. The world simply was, present, unwithholding. He looked across the river. On the far side, a single tree stood, heavy with fruit. Apples, perhaps, or pears, the distance blurred the detail. They hung low, red and gold against green leaves. He could have crossed, reached, taken one. Instead, he remained seated, watching them sway in the wind. Time passed without urgency. Shadows lengthened across the grass. A bird called once from somewhere upstream, clear and brief, then fell silent. Tantalus rose at last, brushed earth from his palms, and continued walking. Not toward the tree, not away from it, simply onward along the bank. The path followed the river's gentle curve, rising slightly, then levelling again. He walked as one who has no destination, yet knows the way will continue. Farther along, he came upon a small clearing. A low stone altar stood at its centre, simple, weathered, no carvings, no offerings. Grass grew around its base, undisturbed. Tantalus approached. He placed one hand on the rough surface. The stone held the day's warmth. He remained there a long moment, feeling the quiet pulse of earth beneath it. Then stepped back. He did not pray. No words rose in him. The altar required nothing. It simply stood, a marker of balance restored. He understood then, without needing to name it, the gods had not forgiven nor forgotten. They had finished. The ledger was closed. What remained belonged to the living, to those who had endured, and now walked free of the ledger's weight. Night came softly. Stars appeared one by one above the plain, brighter than any he remembered from his mortal years. He lay on the grass, arms behind his head, watching them turn in their slow circles. No cold reached him. No hunger woke him in the dark hours. Sleep arrived like a tide, gentle, complete. When dawn returned, pale light brushed the river, turning its surface to silver. Tantalus woke without startlement. He sat up, stretched limbs that had once known only reaching, only denial. He rose, walked to the water once more, drank again. The river gave freely. He looked back along the path he had followed. No opening to the hollow remained. No shadowed corridor waited. Only grass, only sky, only the slow turning of day into day. Somewhere distant, the others moved through their own mornings. Cassandra perhaps stood in a temple courtyard, listening to wind move through columns, speaking only when she chose. Actaeon ran through forest trails, no hounds at his heels. Arachne wove at a loom set beside an open window, threads holding fast. Niobe walked among olive groves, hands resting on bark that remembered no grief. Ixion drove his chariot across open fields, reins loose. Sisyphus sat on a hillside, watching clouds pass. Tityos breathed the open air, body whole and quiet. And Prometheus, wherever he had gone, had carried the last spark upward, not to steal again, but to set it free. Tantalus turned toward the rising sun. He began to walk once more, not hurried, not burdened. The river flowed beside him, companion without demand. Fruit trees appeared along the way, branches low, heavy with yield. He passed them without reaching. The act of passing was enough. Behind him the altar remained, small and silent in the clearing. Before him the plain opened wider still, horizon distant, sky endless. The order of things had been preserved, not through chains, not through hunger, not through eternal labor, but through completion. And in that quiet, sunlit expanse, where no punishment lingered and no debt remained, the story of those who had angered the gods came to its close, not with thunder, not with judgment, but with the soft, steady sound of a man walking forward, free at last to do so. Good night,